I never guess if God's on something or not in Iris.
Never guess. Cool.
I know that if he's doing something, it's him. I don't have to sustain it. Now we serve, we do it with excellence to the best of our abilities, but things aren't happening because I am making them happen. He has to make it happen. And I only want to do what I see the Father doing. We only want to do what we see the Father doing. So we're totally dependent on all sorts of miracles. The connections, all of it. Our tribe is marked by the miraculous. That, of course, that's healings, but it's in everything. We're totally dependent on him. So that's our second. Our third is, and this is probably our most controversial one.
Controversial.
Which it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But we will suffer for him if necessary.
Yeah.
Okay? Suffering is a part of the gospel.
Right.
And we're called to serve those who
Romans
are suffering.
8.
But we're also called to enter into it as well. So we will suffer for him if necessary. So we're not looking for it. We're not looking for it.
If it's
Like I need
But
to
if it
suffer,
happens,
yeah.
we're there.
Yeah.
So like right now,
and we're not complaining about it. Like,
well, that's the fourth.
oh,
That's the fourth, right?
sorry.
Right? We'll suffer for him if necessary, and then the joy of the Lord is our strength. It's
Yeah.
not an option. So can you drink from? We have this saying where we drink from the cup of joy and suffering. Yeah. Anybody can suffer and anybody can have joy, but can you do both at the same time? Because real joy in the Lord, in the Spirit, like if you can have His joy, which sustains us, and we are filled, and we fall more in love with Him, and if you can have that in the midst of suffering, and guys, I've seen it. I sat with pastors. I sat with 4 of our pastors, no, 5 of them, and I heard them. So right now in Mozambique, our churches are being burned and pastors are being killed, and
Whoa.
hundreds of thousands of displaced people. And these are all like around where we've planted our churches. I sat with 5 of our pastors, and I listened to them tell the most horrific stories I've ever heard. And I don't want to say it here but the worst things you can imagine. And I listened to one, and just some of the lesser horrific things was my wife was kidnapped. She's being abused right now. My daughter ran. We haven't found her. My son was shot. And they came back 2 days later to collect the body, and he was cut into pieces. That's not the horrific, like there's more horrific than that. So I listened to one, I listened to another, I started listening to the third, and it was so grotesque what I heard. I ran out and I vomited.
Whoa.
Like I've never done this before. Like I lost my lunch listening to what they were saying. I came back and continued to hear the stories. And at the end of it all, we prayed. And I watched these guys who shared the most horrific things. I watched them worship.
Oh my God.
Do you want to know? My response was offense. I was offended. And I was ashamed that I had been serving the Lord for 21 years at that point, 22 years. And I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know God like they know God.
Praying to suffer.
So we go and minister the next day, and we're feeding a village that lost everything, and we're at a internally displaced camp. So it's like where people have fled.
Yeah.
I think there was something like 850,000 IDPs, internally displaced people. So we're at one of the camps, we're feeding them, and I look over as we're sitting with mamas who are telling us the same stories, all these people that are telling us the exact same stories. Husband's dead, they chopped his head off, blah, blah, like just the worst. And I look over, and those pastors that I sat with the day before are preaching the gospel, and they are jumping around and dancing. They have 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds that they don't even know where they are. Like if that was me, I would be curled up in a ball beside myself. They're jumping around, they're preaching the gospel. And they finish, and I grab them and I said, I don't understand. Like, help me. How do you have this? Like, how do you have this much joy? Like, and one of the pastors looked at me and he said, you can burn my food, you can burn my home, but you cannot burn Jesus out of me. You cannot burn him out of me.
Oh my
and
God,
and
it's crazy.
and I realized I said, how long have you been a pastor? How long have you been saved? 6 years. These are the poorest of the poor. And this is why I love missions. We can get so complicated. We can make the gospel so complicated. And God has different callings for everybody, right? Some are called to take nations, some are called to be missionaries, some are called to pastor, apostle, prophet, teacher, evangelist. Those are the gifts of administration, those are the gifts of help. But like at the end of the day, if we lose that, see, this was the early church.
Yes.
This is how Rome received the gospel not because of a strategy, because Christians gave their lives. And they gave their life to Jesus knowing that they would probably die. And I would encourage anyone here to read the stories from the early church.
Yeah.
It puts it all back into context.
Yeah.
And so joy in the midst of suffering. And it's real. It's not a made up thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's the fourth one. And then the last one is we search for revival amongst the poor.
Oh my. Yeah.
Lower still. You know that the Jordan River is the lowest river on the globe,
Crazy.
Yeah. Oh.
and it runs into death, the Dead Sea.
Let's see.
True. Crazy.
It runs, and I just think if you read the Beatitudes, you can't get away from the poor.
Yeah.
And this is something that I learned doing missions. We don't go to help. We go and receive.
Yeah. Always.
You go and receive. There's a simplicity, a beauty, and a love, and a community. I overheard one of the podcasts that you had earlier. He was talking, and we were talking about this before we got on. Like one of the healthiest things that keeps you is like community.
Yeah.
Every village,
Yeah.
those kids get raised by the whole village. Like there is these communities. I have sat with billionaires. I've ridden in jets, private helicopters. I've never been more honored by this one person than this grandmother who killed her last chicken, cooked it up, and sat there with all of her grandkids there and her family there. And she was taking care of all the grandkids because the parents had died. And they all watched me sit there and eat it. And I tried to offer it to them. And she just yelled at me, no, this is for you. Literally giving you everything.
Yeah.
And I just met her. Literally, they will give you anything and everything. Like most Christians, like myself included, I am the worst. Like we're like, oh gosh, should I give 5 reais or 10 reais em oferta? Não sei, eu quero, não sei, este novo café ou qualquer coisa aí.
Yeah.
And you get around the poor, and they'll give you anything.